morning, we have with us a man known as the Millennial Whisperer, Tuff. Chris is a partner at the advertising agency 22 Squared in Atlanta, where he took a team of millennials from an investment to a major profit center in short order. His best-selling book, The Millennial Whisperer, is written by a leader for leaders. It shares proven, practical, and profit-driven strategies for leading millennials in the workforce. His goal, as he explains it, is to help companies and leaders immediately boost productivity without building an office full of ping pong tables, beer kegs, and participation trophies. Chris, we're glad to have you here with us to help us better understand, appreciate, recruit, and manage millennials. Well, Chris, it's good to talk with you this morning, and I got to begin at the beginning. What exactly is a millennial whisperer?
So it was funny. I think it takes me back to, I'm not a self-proclaimed millennial whisperer. Okay. How the book was born was actually on an executive retreat 3.5 years ago. And I was sitting around the fire, and my job at my advertising agency where I'm a partner had evolved from being kind of the digital and social person to being more of like that coach for our employees. We have 400 employees at our firm, and most of them are millennials and Gen Zers. And so when I sat up next to the fire to introduce myself, I was like, well, hey, everyone, I'm Chris Tuff, and I'm kind of like the millennial whisperer. I mean, I shared my story, sat down by the fire, and these guys kind of perked up, average age being kind of 55, small business to large businesses. And they're like, so Chris, tell me some of the stuff you do. And I started telling them some of the tactics I use with my team and the results that I've been able to see out of that. And my friend Tommy, who is leading this retreat, says, Chris, you got to write that book. And so I was like, all right, I'll write the book. And so I'm not a self-proclaimed millennial whisperer. All I'm trying to do is use this idea that a lot of the things millennials and Gen Zers want are the things that we all want. And millennials and Gen Zers aren't the problem. They just expose a lot of the problems. And I think that's what we'll talk about today.
I'm looking forward to it. What inspired you to begin this journey of enlightening the world on how the millennial generation works?
So more than anything, the greatest disparity that exists today, I feel like, is connection, right? And, if you break down the data first, what millennials and Gen Zers are looking for out of leadership, it's three main things: inspirational leadership, autonomy, and transparency. And as I kind of became obsessed with this idea of how can we use not only these needs as a way to evolve our organizations, but also how can we get better for everyone, all generations. And that's what really set me out to write that book, because even autonomy and transparency are things that people talk a lot about, but they are interpreting them the wrong ways. And I can talk a little bit more about that if you want, but
I do. I'd like lean in on that
Sure.
Because autonomy scares a lot of people in leadership because it kind of makes them think if you give too much autonomy, the work might not get done. So lean into that.
Great point. So I was struggling with that in writing The Millennial Whisperer. And so I went to Google and I typed in #1 boss for millennials. And sure enough, Forbes called this guy, Ben Kirshner, out of Philadelphia. He has 1,000 employees, the #1 boss for millennials. And I said, all right, awesome. I'm going to call this dude. So I call him and I was like, Ben, listen, before we get going, I'm really struggling with this idea of autonomy. Can you bring to light to me just what it means for you? And he goes, Chris, have you ever seen the Under Armour commercial, Protect This House? I'm like, where's he going with this? I think so. Yeah. Tell me more. He goes, well, first, you've got to ask yourself as a leader of your organization, do you have a house worth protecting? Do you have a culture that when you tell your people to protect this house at any cost, will they protect it? I was like, oh my God, that's brilliant, right? Like, do you have a house worth protecting? The second thing is that you have to use, anytime you get your team together or you're, for example, doing unlimited paid vacation, you've got to put it on your people to protect this house. So for example, he used the example of unlimited paid vacation. He had just released it when we had talked, and what he found was that he was like, listen, no one has to come to me about covering for one another for your unlimited paid vacation. It's up to you to protect this house. And the other thing we started to talk about was sometimes we will hire new employees and we'll find 6 months in, they're the bad culture fit. And Ben was like, even in those cases, I say, if there's a bad culture fit, it's up to you all to spit that person out. So protect this house at all costs. And I love that interpretation of autonomy.
So wait a minute now. So you put the onus on the team to protect the culture and, as you say, protect the house.
Yep.
How do you manage that so that it doesn't blow up and end up becoming even more of a culture killer because people become, get at odds or clicks form or whatever?
So the clicks thing, right? I talk about culture, right? Culture is this thing that so many leaders feel like is just like 7 tenets on their website. It's not that. Culture comes from your people and is a byproduct. Good culture is a byproduct of good leadership. And oftentimes these organizations will throw the money at the wrong solutions, ping pong tables, beer kegs. I mean, NCR in town built a $500 million huge office, amazing office, because they had a culture problem. And so, this idea of culture, when you start to go to a place, okay, comes from the people, it's up to you to basically put the guardrails on it and to reward and recognize around those things that you want to hold up. That's how you keep the culture in control. But it's also important to let subcultures thrive, right? So your IT department is very different than your sales department, than your account management people, right? So one of the tactics I say is that, especially with rewards and recognition, give each department their own budgets to reward in the ways that they see fit. Because we've got to also allow some of those subcultures within this grander, this bigger culture to thrive.
I love that. I love it. So you published this 3 years ago and have sold thousands of copies. What's been your biggest realization of what's happening in the workplace today?
So I wrote this pre-pandemic. And so I think it's important to note that a lot of the things that I bring up in the Millennial Whisper around flexible work, really core leadership pieces that your people are craving, connection being one of those have only been accelerated with the pandemic. And so the greatest thing that I found from a generational difference is a couple pieces. One, work flexibility, right? Work flexibility, first of all, is bigger than just being able to work from where you want to work. Okay. And I talked to dentists, for example, and they're like, well, I can't do that. I was like, okay, that's fine. Now you've got to look at more of what's a 4-day work week look like, because a lot of these millennials and Gen Zers, their peers are now they're working from home. So we've got to be introducing some of those things. I also bring up an example of a company in California. And when I'm doing speeches, I say, guess the company, but I'm going to tell you. But on the 1-year anniversary of being there, you are allowed to write your own job description, with the caveat that you can do that new job description as long as you sell it into everyone else on your team. And that company is Morningstar Tomato Farm in their manufacturing plant, right? Like where they're actually pressing the tomatoes, and they have a 99% retention rate. And so work flexibility is one of the biggest pieces. I was speaking to a firm recently, and they said for every employee they lose, and they're losing lots of them, it's $1 million. And so before I got up there, I was like, okay, I'm going to save you guys $5 million just by wrapping your head around work flexibility. Okay. I'll save you 5 of these. And that is one of the biggest pieces. But here's one of the other things that we need to realize is that when millennials and Gen Zers enter our workforce, there is this desire that profession and passions are not mutually exclusive, that they're coming to work there to actually get a little bit more that they want to be passionate about it. And you juxtapose that, especially to boomers and older kind of Xers, there's this idea that you go to work, right? There's none of this passion stuff. You go to work, you do your job, and you go home, and then you do your passion stuff, hang out with the family, do your hobbies, whatever it is. And it's actually with that one of the more contentious things that I bring up, it's up to us as leaders to be more of a mentor and coach to our people, but also to help them identify what those passions are and encourage them to do side hustles to actually scratch that itch so they don't end up leaving to then try to pursue those things.
Well, so there is so much wisdom in that because and tell me if you agree, by encouraging what you just said, you also encourage them to focus on what they're doing when they're at the job, so they can focus on their thing because they've got time for the other thing, correct?
Correct. And I have this thing called my 70-30 rule. All right. My 70-30 rule comes out of the fact that because of social media, especially the younger generations have this idea that the grass is greener on the other side. And we're starting to see that as people hop from job to job and they're ditching their jobs because they're like, oh, well, I think it's better over here. And so my 70-30 rule is just teaching all of my employees in their first week that 30% of your job is going to suck. It's going to be in that zone of hate, right? For me, it's anything in Excel documents or budgets. And what I do is I say, all right, figure out what's in your 70% zone of fire you up and fuel you up. And then what's in your 30% zone of suck of your job description. So what will happen is they'll go 3 days of that zone of suck. And they're like, oh, well, I just need to power through. This is in my 30% to get to the other side versus them just quitting on you because they have 3 days of doing stuff that they just don't really want to do. And I've spoken at some of the most prestigious global brands. And the first question I'll ask some of their all-star millennial and Gen Zers is the 70-30 rule real here in these walls? Does 70% of your job fire you up, fuel you up? And it was in one occasion at this massive brand. The guy kind of looks around and it was a wall of executives. He goes, actually, it's like 70-30 the other way. There's so much bureaucracy here that most of my time is doing this other stuff. I said, great, that's fine. I turned to the executives. I said, now it's up to you all to offset that because you, Alex, he was 28 years old, ran one of the big brands within this global prestigious company. And I said, it's up to you all to help him fuel those things so he doesn't leave, because it needs to be somewhere in line of that 70-30.
Wow. So, okay, you're saying within organizations, the two biggest things that create pushback are the idea that everyone needs a side hustle and to follow your team on social media. Talk about that a little bit.
An executive reached out to me, a fairly well-known executive. And he was like, Chris, like I'm having a really hard time with this all-star millennial on my team. And as the millennial whisperer, maybe you can help me out. And he started to tell me some of the things that he was going through. And what we figured out was like, what I said to him was like, all she wants from you is a little bit of time for you to show that you are taking a vested interest in her life, both personal life as well as professional life. And so I call it the art of the flyby. And the art of the flyby is that don't wait for your one-on-one meeting to try to create a connection with those younger and older people on your teams. Instead, go by their desk and say, hey, for example, using social media, Meg, you may have seen that she just adopted a new dog. That dog you adopted is adorable. Where'd you get it? Tell me, what's his name? She's going to say, oh my gosh, Mr. Tuff actually cares about me. And, I had one executive be like, but if I start following them on social media, they're going to see I have 7 Ferraris and they're going to be like, how come I'm not getting paid? And I was like, dude, they don't care about your stuff. They care that you're taking a vested interest in their lives. And I even had a dentist that I was helping out, a buddy of mine his name's Tish, up in Boston. And he actually moved his desk next to the punch out clock to force more of those art of the flyby. So every morning and every afternoon, he would actually go and say, dude, that vacation you just took to the Keys looked epic. Tell me about where you stayed. And he said it's had a huge impact on his ability to create genuine connection. And I think it's important to note, so why are these people this way, right? Like, a lot of it comes down to parenting. I'm 41 years old, so I'm right on the cusp of kind of millennial and Gen Xer. I'm actually a Gen Xer, but one of the things that I talk about is like, even our time at the dinner table, right? When I was sitting across from my very British father, it was, Christopher, what are you doing? Where are you going? Like, how are your grades, right? It was very authoritarian. Whereas the younger you get in the millennial set and into Gen Zers, the more of that's thrown out the window. They're playing beer pong out back. They're talking about what they did over the weekend. It's much more of a camaraderie and less of that authoritarian structure. And so when these young people enter our four doors or in our four walls into our front door. And they're like, well, they're craving that same sort of relationship that you're not just the boss, but you're also a mentor and coach. And I think that's an important differentiation.
Wow. Well, listen, in addition to flybys, what are some other things that millennials look for in a leader? And on a similar note, what do healthy boundaries look like in a workplace, especially between a leader and those that they are leading?
One of the most simplest, like the simplest tactic of all the things in like my, I guess, like arsenal is rewards and recognition. And one of the stories I talk about is the Big Blue Rooster. And in doing research for the book, I came across this company out in San Francisco called Domo, which is now publicly traded. But when they first started, they were a very sales-driven organization. And what they did on everyone's first day, they would put their at-bat song. So like, what do you want to come on the loudspeakers when you go out for your at-bat? So you'd peep like Christopher Tuff, All I Do Is Win, blah, 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 right? And on the first day of every month, what they do for rewards and recognition from a top down is they blare the at-bat song of the number one sales producer. And then blue sirens go off, and then they take a 10-foot blue rooster on wheels that sits next to that cubicle for the full month. How many bonuses, cash bonuses do they give away or options in the company? Zero. They give away a big blue rooster. So I will ask organizations, what is your big blue rooster? Get creative about it. You've got to be doing something on a monthly, quarterly, or at least annual basis to recognize those people. But the same is also true from a peer-to-peer recognition. So once again, autonomy, push down that recognition on your people. And I do this in my all hands meetings, and some people think it's cheesy, so which is fine, but I do snaps, and I'll start my all hands meeting and say, I'm going to start it off. Meg, way to crush that presentation. You killed it, snaps. And then they give snaps to everyone else. I had a friend of mine, he was like, Chris, that's really cheesy. I'm not going to do that. I was like, okay. And he's like, I'm an introvert too. Like, so what do I do? I was like, what about a song? And he thought about it, and he was like, okay, I'll think about that. Like, so he reported back 2 months later. He goes, okay, Chris, here's what I do, and it's working. I play Shaka Khan's. Tell me something good. I'm a horrible singer. But then that means everyone's got to go into the main room. And then that's the kickoff for the all hands meeting. And everyone tells them something good of what someone else has done for them on the team. And so I think one of those missing pieces, that there is a truth to the neediness of millennials and Gen Zers. And a lot of that is because they had snowplow parents. They received participation trophies for everything. And so there's an increased need for that. Also, social media's impact for that instant gratification has fueled that. But I feel like that is one of the more simple things. And from a bang for your buck, tactically, the simplest thing anyone can do here is that when someone gets a call out from a customer and you get an email or from someone else on the team, all you have to do is press forward on that email, CC the whole team, the boss and the boss's boss, right? Whoever's there, and just say, job well done, insert a GIF, right? And you will get the biggest bang for your buck in terms of fueling a little bit of that need.
Tell me why. Tell me why that's that, because I agree with you, but tell me why that's such a big deal.
So most of it, I believe, from a sociological standpoint, is a product of social media. And if you think about a couple things that I want to talk about here, right? The influence of social media is probably the most profound of what makes generations truly different in both how they function and their needs. And if you take any time they wanted that sort of recognition, they posted something to Instagram to get the 120 likes, right? Whether it be the trip they just took, their cute dog, whatever. If they don't get 120 likes, they take it down because it's embarrassing, because it's not enough, right? So that has basically created more of that need, coupled with how they were parented with the participation trophies. But the other thing that's also true with the adoption of technology, and this is what makes older millennials very different than younger millennials, is that older millennials had beepers in college, right? They didn't even have social media. Whereas younger millennials at age 13, they were given a brand new iPhone with a Snapchat account. So if you think about how you and I had to even just flirt with someone, we had to pick up the phone, right? We had to call, we had to get through mom and dad first. And I had to get through dad, which was always difficult. Right. And then finally I had I would make a list because I was always so nervous to talk to whoever it was. And then I would talk on the phone. You put that up against, now it's all done on Snapchat, right? So there's this massive interpersonal and there's not as much of that interpersonal muscle that you and I have, but there's also an increased reliance on technology and texting to get those conversations done. And so one thing I did, I made a rule at our organization that if you're in the same office as someone, you are not going to text them. You're not going to email them. You're going to get your butt out of your seat and you're going to go talk to them person to person. And the pandemic has only increased the need for that. And so it's actually so much more profound when you can have that, but it's up to us as leaders to help them grow that muscle.
That's so good. So good. So what are some of the myths about millennials that you can debunk for us today?
One of the biggest pieces that I run into with organizations is the mentality as I present the data, right? In terms of, from a leadership perspective, it's inspirational leadership, it's autonomy, and it's transparency. From an organizational point of view, number one is work flexibility. Okay. So when you start presenting that to people, they're like, yeah, well, I kind of agree with all this stuff, right? But what I run into is the mentality of, well, Chris, I had to do it this way. Why don't they? And that to me is one of the biggest issues. If you look at, the kind of those stereotypes of what is true, if you look at the cover of the Millennial Whisper, you'll see all of the negative adjectives that they're described as. They are more needy. They are, right? They are more sensitive. But, I flip that on the other side of, well, so let's double down in what those strengths are, fueling your innovation pipeline. They're digital natives, right? Let's double down on them to help come up with whatever is next, right? Your social media marketing. These guys can create a TikTok that millions of people will watch. Put it on them. You don't always have to hire an outside resource for that. So, I think there's actually a lot more benefits than there are pros than there are cons.
Oh man, so good. I feel like people are getting everything that they came to get this morning by listening to you talk about it. So what are millennials searching for in their careers?
So one of the big pieces that I run into with these organizations is that, and it's hard for Xers and boomers to wrap their head around, is this idea that companies need to prioritize purpose over profits. And I work with a handful of organizations in, especially if they're publicly traded companies, they are profit driven. So I help them really unearth, okay, what more are you willing to do to actually do social good? Because the younger you get in millennials and into Gen Zers, the more of a priority that is for organizations. And I take it to the next level of, also one of my sole mission in life is to help unlock passions in others and then be the catalyst for them to pursue that. And so I take it obviously to the nth degree, and I will actually help every single person on my team create a purpose statement and then a plan to go after that thing, whether it be with a side hustle, with nonprofits that we get associated with. But purpose needs to be at the core of your organization. If you're not doing it, you got to do it starting tomorrow.
Wow. Wow. Can you share some of the best practices for recruiting and hiring millennials?
Yes. And I call it the art of the courtship. And the art of the courtship is that, when we're trying to recruit top talent, don't go and bring them into a just traditional interview, right? Instead, go and take them to coffee, right? Some of these things will take time to get the right people there. And you guys, a lot of these people that are probably watching this right now are like, well, I don't have time for that. And so I would push it on your people to actually do the courtship, right? Double down on some of those rewards for actually placing people in jobs, $300 a placement or whatever it is that you're incentivizing your employees, but have them actually take part in that courtship so they can be stewards of your culture, but then also alleviate that kind of off of you. And so we got to look at this more as a long-term thing. And, I always tell organizations that, I'm a big advocate of test driving first. So I'll actually do a freelance to hire scenario, which, in today's market might not be all that easy. But usually if you can't do that, then you got to work on your culture first, right? So I will remind everyone at every turn, we only take a team, right? And you've got to rise to that bar. If you're below it, you're not going to make it to the next level, right? And even when we have an exit or something happens, I'm very transparent in telling them what they may have done wrong and what they've done right. But so I feel like being able to get, both the courtship as well as being able to spit out the bad seeds as fast as possible, hire slow, fire fast, right? That's a real thing.
Well, talking about keeping millennials motivated, I'd like to ask you that. When they are motivated, it can be amazing because of all of those creative genes that pop out. And like you say, they not only want to protect the house,
Yep.
they want to bring all of that energy into it. So getting them motivated has a big long-term impact on your company too, right?
Yep. And one of the things, if you look at the statistics of, I would encourage everyone to just download the Deloitte Millennial and Gen Z survey. They just updated it this past year. But if you look at that data, you can quickly also unearth that this continuous learning is real. And I've had employees try to come to me and say, okay, so Chris, I really want to go to South by Southwest for this continuous learning. I'm like, yeah, you want to go to South by Southwest to party your face off. Okay, I've been there. Right? I know why you want to go South by Southwest. So guess what? I'm going to make it South by Southwest every month. So I'm going to bring in an outside expert to inspire you and to teach you new things. And then I'm also going to offer myself up as an entrepreneur to be a resource for you. I'm going to show you how to create a cap table, right? I'm going to show you, you want to raise money? I'll show you how to raise money. And so there's also, I feel like this move to let's bring some of those experts to our organization versus sending our people out to some lame conference where nothing gets done. I think shifting our mentality there is really important. The other thing that I found to be really successful is to leave an open hour every week or month, probably month, where different people can actually teach other people on the team one of those things that they might be really good at. It might be training their dog, right? Or it might be how to make a cookie, enterprise, right? Whatever it is, I look to them to kind of cross-pollinate some of that need for continuous learning.
Fantastic. Gen Zers are entering the workplace. Do you do the same tactics that work for millennials apply to the Zers?
So once again, older millennials are very different than younger millennials. And then younger millennials are a little bit more like Gen Zers, right? And so the first thing I'll tell people is like, you guys can't even get it right with the older millennials. Okay. So don't even worry. Like, let's get that ship in shape first. And then we can start focusing on that younger talent. But one of the big differentiators, and I think I alluded to this before, is that increased need for doing social good and purpose, as well as looking to organizations to implement more mental health resources as a part of your benefits program. We're starting to see a lot more of that in the younger that we get with it.
Wow. And you referenced earlier social good. I find that millennials are more willing to be involved in their communities and attach themselves to things that make the cities that they live in even better. And that's a very admirable thing.
It is. And I mean, find your local charity. I have a friend that he actually will have his team vote on the charity of their choice. So puts it on the people. And then every month, if they hit their goals, it might be only like a few $100, but they print out one of those huge checks and all the employees get to present it to the charity of their choice.
Love it. So you've talked about this generation and others having unrealistic expectations for their jobs because of social media. How can a company provide millennials with realistic expectations without scaring them?
Yeah. So, I had a friend come to me and they're like, Chris, I'm promoting do you know how many VPs we have? Like 90%, because the only way I can keep them is by promoting them. I was like, okay, you're using the wrong things in your arsenal to address these issues. And a lot of the times when people are more relying on like the promotions or the bonuses, it's because they it's the only way that they feel recognized and rewarded, right? So let's look, if once we start actually putting more of this connection in place, the need for those things go away. But the other thing tactically that I will tell organizations is you have got to have a very specific layout of what their current job is, what their job description is, what that promoted position is, what that job description is. And then sit them down and say, you are not promoted until you're doing everything in that next job category. And it's not until then that you will look to get a promotion. And so by doing that, you lay out very specific expectations. And then you also got to tell them what the timeline looks like. People always want to know where it is that they're working towards, right? So if it's between 1 and 2 years that they can look to be promoted, then lay that out there.
I also want to ask, you often say that millennials need purpose, profit, and acknowledgement. You talk about leaders, that leaders should hero their people. Talk about those two things. What does that mean?
So one of the things that I go to, once again, to the next degree, but if I have someone on my team that is deserving of a raise that I then need to bring to the C-suite, I will tell them before that I will throw myself in front of a car for you. I am going to do everything in my power to get this. If I don't get it, I'm sorry. But just know that I respect, and we will work towards it, right? So you set that expectation, but you also tell them, like, I am willing to do almost anything for you in this circumstance. And so heroing your people is that, but it's also in that forwarding of the email, right? When they get that recognition from a client and forwarding it on to the CEO and saying, check out what Meg just did last week and this compliment she got, and then CCing her. That's what I mean by heroing them up, right? By recognizing them. And the opposite side of that same coin is true, where if people are not meeting that expectation, you've got to tell them. And there's this fallacy in especially boomers and Xers that millennials and Gen Zers don't want feedback. They're like, every time they come in for their annual reviews, or whenever I call them in my office, they start crying immediately. And I'm like, dude, the reason for that is because anytime they come into your office, you're giving them harsh feedback. And so they want real-time feedback, and they want it grounded in data. And I say, you got to build a better sandwich. And so when you're doing it, you're looking at a more sensitive generation. So that better sandwich is go in with a compliment, and then you put in and ground that feedback in data in the middle, and then you end it with a compliment. So if Meg just did, poor Meg, I keep picking on her, but Meg just did a presentation. It was the worst presentation you've ever seen. She said like 32 times, she 15 times, take down that data. You say, Meg, within 24 hours, I'm so glad you push yourself out of your comfort zone. Use the word and, not but. And I took a couple notes of how we can improve it, grounded in data. You said 32 times. You said like 15 times. And I want you to keep getting better, but let's practice not in front of our clients anymore, and maybe our own people. And you end it, but keep pushing, blah, blah, blah. And so that is, I feel like, another really impactful thing that we can all do as leaders. And give them that feedback in real time. But you can also do just positive feedback. Dude, you crushed it. Awesome. High five, right? Like, and so don't wait for the one-on-one annual review to give that feedback.
Well, let's get back to your book. How did the Millennial Whisperer lead to your upcoming book, Save Your Ask? And I did say ask for our people listening.
So when the pandemic hit, I was actually supposed to be on the main stage at Nike with Heidi O'Neill, their new president. And then I got a call from Heidi's assistant saying, Chris, it ain't happening. Like, this pandemic is legit. I'm like, oh, great. This. I don't know how long this is going to last. And as I was sitting there, I reflected back, okay, what is the one book that I was born to write? And I'd done these lecture series at Vanderbilt, where I went to school, and a few other schools, how to network like a mofo. And I was like, what if I took how to network like a mofo and those lectures, which were like some of the most popular lectures for this younger demographic? What if I took that and I married it with this kind of awareness that a lot of people, especially younger people, do not have enough passion in their life? What if we could introduce a little bit more passion into both our lives and workplace, but then also a call to action of save our ask in order to be better networkers and sellers. And so I then interviewed 44 people, from billionaires to professional surfers to actors and actresses. And I used these stories to bring about some of these concepts to become a little bit more connected outward, right? So the Millennial Whisperer was all about the importance of connection inward, and this is more about connection outward. And one of the other things I wanted was like, what's something that I could actually do a speech in or talk on one of these, and people can walk away and get instant ROI.
So I gotta ask, how does one network like a mofo?
So you want my favorite tactic out of the book? It's called, have you ever heard of the verb shawshanking?
No.
Okay. I didn't either. So I had, in 2012, I landed a huge software deal with an entrepreneur, and I was the buyer. And I turned to this guy. I had met him 7 years prior in a closed Facebook group. His name's Jason. I turned to Jason at our steak dinner as we were celebrating the biggest deal of his life and one of the biggest ones I'd ever signed. I was like, Jason, I am like diagnosed ADD. And here we are. You did it with me. The sales guy is just really interested in, how did you land me? He goes, dude, I Shawshanked you. I was like, Shawshank, what's that? He's like, in Shawshank Redemption, Andy Dufresne, he chipped away, right? To get out. He also wrote a letter to the library, to the board, to actually get his library funded. It wasn't until 2 years in that he got his $300 check. So I made it a verb, and I Shawshanked you. I've had a touch point with you for the last 7 years every week. It's been on Facebook, Facebook Messenger, Instagram Messenger, text, but I've had a touch point with you. And now here we are. I've grown that relationship through that Shawshanking. And I had just gotten a call from one of the top 50 largest organizations in the US, and they wanted to hire me as their social and digital person. And I was kind of obnoxious in my reply. And I said, yeah, you can hire me ... as your agency partner. And I was like, I just need to call her because I'm going to Shawshank them. And so I call her and I was like, listen, let me just come down there and make sure you don't hire the wrong person for this job. And she was like, sure, come on down. And I went down there, and it was her and her head of marketing, and I did my thing. And that was it, right? I said, this is who you need to hire. I'll give you a couple of referrals. And then they call me back in. They're like, hey, will you do this learning session for 5,000 of our employees that run our retail business? I was like, absolutely. And so 14 months later, we got our first project from them. And it was a huge deal because I'd successfully Shawshanked them. If you fast forward to today, what's cool is we have 120 people on that one account that I was able to Shawshank. And so what I'm trying to do is look at networking and sales a little bit differently. Use save your asks as a call to action. Let's make sure we're not the askhole, right? I talk about askholes a lot. The people that go in for 3 asks in a row, or half of my email inbox are askholes. Hey, Chris, can I get 15 minutes of your time? But do a little bit of research, right? Like actually strike a chord with me. And the fact that you just spent 3 minutes looking at what I even represent, right? So I feel like with a switch of some of this just mentality, it will have, and it has instant results in your top and bottom line.
This is a master class in what people in the C-suites really should know. You've given us so much great information this morning. What would you say is the single most impactful change our audience could undertake right away to improve their leadership for millennials?
Take a vested interest in your younger employees' lives and have the conversations of what motivates you, what excites you, what is it that you want to do in the world. And when we start doing that, that is where your retention rate will skyrocket, your culture will get better, and you will actually be able to retain your top talent, right? So, and it seems so simple, but we were all brought up to believe that you don't talk about that stuff at work. And that time has now changed.
Man, millennials on our teams, thank you so much for taking the time to be with us this morning. And I tell you what, man, I think the energy, the information, the insights, the experience. There is no way you can walk away from this without having a better understanding of millennials. And words like asshole and shawshanking, thank you for introducing those into my lexicon, brother.
You know it, baby. And yeah, I mean, just do one thing different, right? Anytime I talk to audiences, just do one thing. Try one thing out of what we just talked about and do it different, because the worst thing you can do is nothing at all.
I'd also like to thank all of you, our guests, for joining us once again this morning, and we thank our sponsors for making this episode possible. Now join us next month when we will hear from best-selling author, leadership expert, and my predecessor as host of this very show, Mr. John Gordon. I'll see you then.